Companies have many things they want to do with customer data beyond sales and outbound marketing. To do that, they need to expose customer data so that data analysts and scientists can build more sophisticated use cases such as marketing attribution, churn prediction, product recommendations. Making all that customer data work for the entire enterprise requires an entirely new architecture that syncs customer data between CDP and Cloud Warehouse without creating a whole bunch more problems than you had before. Today, we have Soumyadeb Mitra here. He is the founder of a Kleiner and Insights-backed Rudderstack, which he will join us just to talk a little bit about the right way to activate all of the data. He is an industry veteran. We're super excited to have him. He's been on the show before, I have learned, and he has a ton of experience in the data, ML, and analytics space, in addition to holding a PhD in computer science from the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Josh, for inviting me to the show. I'm super excited to be back.
Yeah, and a lot of things have been going on with Rudderstack. We've got some exciting new approaches and thought work that we want to hear about from you. But before we get into that, maybe you can just give us a little background on yourself and Rudderstack for those who may not be familiar with it.
Yeah, so I'll start with myself. I am Soumyadeb. People call me Soumya. And I'll go in the reverse chronology order, right? I mean, I've been doing Rudderstack for the last 4 years. I started in June 2019, so this is almost our 4th year. Before Rudderstack, I spent a year in this company called 8x8, a public telecom company, where I was trying to set up a very similar stack of collecting customer data, doing things with that data, and activating that data back. And the challenges that I ran into in that process, prompted me to start Rudderstack. Before 8x8, I was the co-founder and CTO of a company called Mariana IQ. At a very high level, we are using machine learning and deep learning to automate marketing. So the idea was that a lot of the marketing actions are very manual, and you could automate that with a ChatGPT-like tech. Of course, we are early both on tech, but also on the market. But learned a lot of things during that process. The primary thing was that most customers do not have clean data, and if you don't have data, then you really can't do much ML and so on. So it was a good learning experience. Ended up selling that company to 8x8 to build a very similar stack, and then ran into similar challenges, and that's why I kind of started Rudderstack. And before that, I started my career in a company called Data Domain. If you know Frank Slootman, the CEO of Snowflake, that was his first company as a CEO. So he recruited me into Data Domain, convinced me after my PhD that I should join that instead of Google. Had an amazing run, great learning experience. He was an amazing leader. So, but as you said, I have a PhD in data. So I've kind of worked in data pretty much all my life. And finally, I hope with Rudderstack, we can solve the data problem, the customer data problem. Data is quite big. And quickly about Rudderstack, we are building what is called a warehouse native CDP. I'm sure we'll talk more about that, but that's kind of Rudderstack in one line.
Yeah, let's kind of break that apart from a terminology perspective and use that as a way to talk about some of the problem statements that you're addressing, because it's an interesting way to talk about what you're doing.
Yeah.
Warehouse native CDP. So why did you choose that as your tagline? Why does that matter to customers?
Yeah. So I think warehouse native and CDP is a customer data platform, right? So for folks who don't know what a CDP is, maybe we can start there and then we can come back to warehouse native, right? So if you look at or even if you split up CDP, right, the code is customer data. What exactly is customer data, right? So if you look at any brand, take Crate & Barrel, right? I mean, they have customers interacting with that brand on multiple channels, right? You have people coming to the website and ordering things. You have people managing their mobile app, coming to their mobile app, going to their store, making transactions, etc., right? So you have all these different channels through which customers are interacting with the brand. And you want to collect all that data. Why is that important? Because like you want to know more about your customers, give them personalized experience, and all the interesting things which you can do if you know your customers better, right? And for that, you need to collect customer data. So that's all is that's the definition of customer data. Now,
Right. Let me ask you. So, but the problem is, now let me guess. I did some research on some other things you talked about, but also from my own experience, right? You've probably got you have multiple lines of business. You have multiple context in which this customer data is collected.
Yep.
And what you end up with is little warrens of data that describe your customer when they are swiping their credit card.
Yep.
And that same customer is described somewhere else in servicing that credit card down the line. And you might not have a clear picture of how those personas, which is really just you, the one person, fit together.
Yes.
And that's one problem that CDPs try to address, right?
Yes, 100%, right? So that is the whole pitch of a CDP. And this, like, we didn't start the market, right? I mean, like, CDPs have been around for like almost 10, 15 years, right? And they came into existence because the folks who wanted to use this data, right? Like the marketing folks mostly, but like sometimes like other business units also, like, it was very hard for them to get access to this customer data, right? And like they had to rely on IT to put up this infrastructure to collect all that data. And this is like early 2010, right? I mean, you had to really set up a Hadoop cluster, right? You're talking about like a data at scale, right? If you're collecting like first-party interactions of the website and mobile app, right? So you have to set up a Hadoop cluster and like hire a team of data engineers to write all that code and all that stuff, right? So
and then you've got a freshness problem, right? You've got a freshness problem because when it's getting collected, it's fresh, but it's messy.
Yeah, exactly.
And then it goes through this long pipeline process of getting, tuned up for the analysts. And by the time they get it, it's not what they wanted.
Exactly. And then anytime you need something new, you want to collect a new event, you have to go back to IT. And then by the time your need for that data goes away, right? So exactly as you pointed out. So marketing said like, oh, IT is too slow. I need them to get away. And then so they kind of like went ahead and bought these other SaaS solutions, right? And like there are a lot of like Segment was one of the first players in the space, which got acquired by Twilio. And then there have been a bunch of startups who have kind of build companies in this space, right? Primarily selling to marketing that like don't have to talk to IT. We will manage everything. We'll collect the data. We'll do it like in our SaaS system, and that went a long way, right? I mean, like it kind of like have solved interesting problems. Now that also has its own sets of challenges, right? I mean, these cloud SaaS black boxes, right? They are good at like collecting data where they can, but if you look at a large enterprise, there is a lot of data that does not flow through these CDPs, right? I mean, when you buy a vendor that a marketing team buys, right? I mean, there's only so much data that can flow into them, right? I mean, there is data in your transactional systems and your backend systems, and like marketing cannot get access to this and like through like a SaaS vendor, right? So you have always this challenge of like the customer data platforms having a limited view of the customer, right? Like they would get data from proper things that marketing would own, like the website maybe, but they will not get data from the transactional systems, the backend systems. So like we had the same challenge at 8x8, right? I mean, there was an incomplete data about customers in our CDPs, right?
So it's the incompleteness that has traditionally been the problem. You don't get you don't get to leverage all the rich data that you have about your customers. And I imagine that's like 10x the problem in the world of training machine learning, because you want as much data as possible to train, right? So you've got an even bigger problem than just having unhappy analysts. It's just not going to work.
100%, right? In fact, like that was the root problem at like my previous role when I was trying to build a churn model, right? Churn is a very simple use case, but a very important use case for anything which is subscription, right? Telecom providers are one. Like if you think somebody is going to churn, it is better to give out the phone for free for 6 months and try to address their concern, because the main cost is the cost of acquiring the customer, right? But it is still important to find these to be churning customer, right? You cannot like give it out to free for everyone. Now, to build this churn model, you need app activity data. If you know that like their usage of the app has gone down or over time, that means they are probably likely going to churn. But then we found that is also a very late predictor, Like, I mean, by the time their usage has gone down, they're probably already made up their mind. So we found that like ticketing data, like support ticket data, is a very lead predictor. And if you know that like somebody has opened a lot of support tickets and the sentiment is very bad, then that data is actually a very good leading predictor of churn. So you need to build a churn model, which is the model is very simple. You can use any standard machine learning
Okay.
algorithm, but you need this completeness of data. You need the app activity data, and you need this like ticketing data, bring them together and join them and create that customer profile. And then like you can train a very simple ML model. The hard part is to get this data together. That's one, right? I mean, like your traditional CDP will maybe have the app activity data. That will not have your ticket data. Your ticket data might be sitting somewhere in your backend warehouse, data warehouse, and so on. How do you like bring both of them together? And then how do you then train machine learning algorithms on top? Right? That is the hard problem, right? Not so much the ML part.
Right. That is the hard problem. And, as you're talking about all these use cases, I'm hearing streaming data, I'm hearing, structured data on-prem in the cloud. I hear all these examples, and yet you're using this term Cloudnative Warehouse. So can
Yeah.
you help me understand that?
Yeah. So that is our pitch, right? I mean, so you had these like data silos where your first party app data is sitting in a cloud CDP, then your let's say ticket data and a lot of backend transactional data you're pulling into your data warehouse like Snowflake and BigQuery and Redshift to do analytics. Like why create these two separate data silos, right? Earlier you had to do it because your data warehouses, right? I mean, if you go back to 2010, there was no cloud data warehouse. Like you had to buy a tenor data and like an on-prem data warehouse where you could not collect all this streaming data, right? That was much higher volume, extremely costly. You cannot dump it. So you had to store it separately in a Hadoop cluster and so on, while your transactional data went to a data warehouse, like a Teradata of the world. So you had to keep them separate. But in the last 4 or 5 years, with the innovation in the cloud data warehouses, it has finally become possible to bring all of this data together into one single place. Like you can literally swipe a credit card and get a 1 terabyte instance of Snowflake and store all that data and process that data, right? So that has been a big shift in this ecosystem. Cloud data warehouses have enabled collection of high volume streaming data, ETL data into one single platform, right? So what you need is like a CDP, like the traditional CDPs did, like the data collection, data unification, everything. Like if you could just run that stack on top of a cloud data warehouse instead of like being another data silo, you can solve a lot of these problems, right? I mean, around like bringing both the data together, data completeness problem, analytics and ML problems, like you could not do on the traditional CDPs. Now you can do on top of a cloud data warehouse. So that's what we are kind of doing with Rudderstack in a
Yeah,
nutshell.
because CDPs got a little bit dusty, right? People were not as interested because of all these problems. And what you're saying is that cloud architectures really opened up a new way of thinking about it. You also have, let's talk a little bit, let's see if we can talk about two things at the same time. But you have this notion of collection, unification, activation. Can we just kind of talk through that? Because I think those are really great pillars for understanding Rudderstack.
Yeah.
But I also want to talk about some architectural decisions underneath those as we go along.
Yeah. So I think like if you look at like this like stack again end to end, like forget Rudderstack. And I mean like you're trying to build this use case of again, let's go back to the churn model, right? And then other things could be similar, right? You want to build that churn model, you want to get your first party app data, like your streaming app data, and then you also want to get your like ticketing data through an ETL kind of a pipeline, right? So you have to run these two pipelines to get data into your data warehouse. That is the collection piece of it, right? The second step is you have to stitch all this data together into this golden customer record, right? I mean, finally, to feed any analytics or ML, you need this like one row per customer with a bunch of features for that customer, right? Features could be like total number of tickets they have opened in the last 7 days. What is the average sentiment score? How many times have they logged in into the app? How many phone calls have they made? How many transactions have they done, right? So these are all the features that are interesting that you want to compute for a user by combining these two data, like the streaming data and the ETL data, right? So this is the final output that you want to get. And there are a lot of challenges in that. I mean, we can get into the details, but like let's for now say that that is the unification step, right? You want to combine all of this into create this golden customer record. Once you do that, then you want to train like an ML algorithm, which, by the way, I mean, I think is the simplest part of this puzzle, right? I mean, you like a simple, you don't need like a chat GPT like deep learning thing to build a churn model. Once you have these features, a very simple gradient boosted tree would like work well for this use case. And once you have, let's say, a churn score, you want to take that and push it back into the business system, right? Finally, your support team has to like give out the 6-month off coupon, or your marketing team has to run that, right? So you have to push that score back into the tool Gainsight, if support is using that or something to for them to act on those predictions and so on. So this is like the activation step, right? Finally getting the data out of the warehouse to a destination. So you can come out like, we call it collection, unification, activation. People can call it others. Like some people don't even have terms for them, but this is the pipeline that you need to build use cases like churn and like, I mean, everything else kind of fits the same model.
Yeah, interesting. That's really helpful. You know, and taking a look at some of I want to talk a little bit about some of the architectural decisions or ways of being that you've just, you know, you've decided on, because I do think it's interesting if you wanted to kind of unbundle like all of these silos, for lack of a better, like the places, like it's not just a silo, it's more than that. You've got all these different systems and then all these different ways of thinking about the same data, right?
Yep.
So you have decided to attack that by using control plane, data plane. You want to talk a little bit about the decisions you've made there and how Rudderstack works in the data plane?
Yeah, I think like, so if you go back to this stack, right, you have the collection piece, which has both streaming data and some ETL data, right? You have to pull it like ticket data through ETL. So like you have the collect piece. The unification piece runs on top of the data warehouse, which like does all the stitching and all the stuff. And then activation is like taking data back from the warehouse into the destination, right? So this is like the end-to-end stack. So at the core of it, you need like some service to move data, right? Like whether it's streaming from cloud to the warehouse or streaming app to the warehouse, whether it's warehouse to the cloud, all these are like data pipelines, right? Some source, some destination, you have to just move data, right? That's what we call the data plane, right? And it is important that your data plane is closer to where a lot of the data is, right? I mean, if you are, let's say, if you are using Snowflake in, like, if everything is running on top of your data warehouse, right? You're pulling the data into the warehouse, you're pushing it out from the warehouse. So if your Snowflake is in a AWS environment, then you want the data plane to run in an AWS environment, right? Like maybe in the same VPC, maybe not, right? Depending on the use case, but at least you want them to run in the same network because you're moving a lot of data, right? Same if you're Snowflake, if you're using GCP as your data warehouse, then you want this data plane to run in that GCP, right? So eventually, if you have like a private cloud and your own Teradata, you want this to run in a private cloud, right? I mean, we don't support that yet, but like in theory, you could do that, right? So that's kind of what we call the data plane, which is like moving the data.
The reason I ask about that is because you have a separate gateway, right? And then you have this data plane world. And I might have gotten some data and information, so call me on it. But it's designed to like sort of politely degrade if there's problems on that data plane and serving side. I thought that was a really great feature for truly large enterprises, because when I hear everything you do, I get a little scared as an enterprise software data person. It feels like these actions could take a long time. They could burn a lot of memory. What happens when it fails? Like, help me understand how you thought through the problems of very large real-time use cases.
Yeah, I think, I mean, there is like so many levels in which we can talk about it, right? I mean, like real-time data is hard, right? I mean, like we are talking about like it's real-time and high volume, right? And
I'm just interested in scale and performance. Like those are huge problems in what you're trying to do.
Yeah, in fact, like we have had customers like who have like sending hundreds of billions of events a month, right? And then like with a strong latency requirement, like you cannot lose events. That's one thing. Plus you have to deliver events in like under 3 seconds, 5-second latency, right? So like you have to operate on those scales. So so that's all handled by our data plane. Now, the way we kind of do that is like even the data plane is split into these multiple components, right? There is the gateway component, which is responsible for ingesting all the data, like it is like, and dumping it into some kind of a queuing system, right? I mean, think of it as Kafka. We don't use Kafka. We have built a homegrown queuing engine, but like it's kind of a messaging bus, just like Kafka. But like our
I think of it as like the waiting room or quarantine before.
yeah, exactly, right? I mean, like, that's a good example. I mean, it's like a waiting room in a hospital, right? Your events come in and then like they get into a waiting room, right? The only thing you want to guarantee is like that gateway never goes down, right? I mean, we can never, I mean, of course, like we are a startup, once in a while we have bugs and we go down, but like it is very, very rare. I mean, I think we are like kept a very high availability on the gateway, and you have to handle things like if you have a, like if you have to do deployments, how do you like rolling deployments without going down? You have like failovers, and then like we have to handle things like how do you scale up? Suddenly, like sometimes you have customers who have like go 10x, right? I mean, their event volume. Like how do you scale that up, scale that down? So like we have built, these are again like hard engineering problems, but like not unsolved problems. And I mean, like a lot of like companies have solved this. Like we have built on Kubernetes, but at a high level, we need this like high available gateway layer, which kind of puts that into a waiting room. And then we have consumers of that data, right? I mean, we have consumers who are now taking that event and then deciding what to do with it, right? I mean, we have a notion of transformation. So like customers can modify the event post hoc, right? That is also important when you have like, you want to fix an event from an app, right? You published an app, there was some error in the event, you want to like make changes before it goes to downstream destinations, right? So we have that notion of a transformation that runs on the event, and then that event is eventually delivered to the destination. Could be a data warehouse, but could also be like a cloud destination. And during that delivery, like again, we have to handle failures, as you pointed out, that if the destination may be down, there may be other kind of errors, network errors, and so on. We have to retry and make sure that it does get delivered. So our system guarantees like nobody can do exactly once delivery, but we do like at least once, and then we try to minimize retries. So like we have built like all that logic in like as the consumers consume that event from that waiting room, and then like do all this processing. So and then that's part of the system can also like scale up, scale down. And the great thing is like this whole thing can be run on your laptop. We are also an open source company, so this entire code is open source, right? So you can run it on your laptop as a Docker image, but we can also run it in like a Kubernetes cluster with like hundreds of consumers and hundreds of gateways and so on.
I was just going to ask that about deployment models. Yeah, that's helpful. Oh, that helps me understand kind of the underlying specialness of this type of architecture, because you really do need that for these like a multinational massive data structure. So that tells us a little bit about what you've been doing. Tell us a little bit, if you're ready, to share about kind of directionally, where's Rudderstack going? What's next?
Yeah. So I think what we have built are the data pipelines, right? I mean, like so far Rudderstack was like a data pipeline company to like move all the data, right? I mean, we can, as I said, like we can do event stream, we can do ETL, bring all the data together, we can send it in real time to different destinations. We also have the reverse ETL pipeline to take data out of the warehouse and send to the destination. So we have all these data pipelines. I think the next step, so that is the collect and the activate step, right? The unification step is what we kind of left it to the customers. We said that, okay, now we got all the data, now you write all the SQL, Spark, whatever transformations to make that.
Can I ask you a question? Yeah, real quickly. So let's talk about unification, exactly what you mean, because I might be guessing. Because I guess it's related to a question I had, which is like, what is the notion of a customer? Once I pull all this stuff in from all over my company, how do I figure out, because they've got different schemas, different data definitions, what is one of one?
Yeah. So that's a great question. I think like, so what does a customer mean to a consumer company and what does a customer mean to a B2B company can be very different, right? Like, and let's start with the simple case of a consumer company. Right? Let's say you are a B2C company, you are like Crate and Barrel, you mostly sell to individuals, right? Then, a customer is like finally an end user. Like there is some end human being that is buying from you, right? Now, you may not have, when you are collecting data, you may not have a consistent ID about the user, right? Like you may be coming to their website, you may going to their mobile app, and like when you come to the website, you get a cookie, and you were as guest, right? So you never logged in, and then you did something on the mobile app, you never logged in, and then maybe you created an account, signed up with an email on the mobile app, maybe you signed up with a phone number. So you have all these different identities which are now generating events, right? You have events associated with all these IDs, and you cannot stitch them together till you provide some head, right? So maybe you eventually give your email address on the mobile phone while you are checking out. When you give that email address, at that point, you know that all these activities are from the same user, right? This email address, this phone number, this mobile device ID, this cookie ID, everything belongs to the same user. So when you are combining all these activities into one customer table, the first step that you have to do is stitch all these identities, right? This anonymous ID, device ID, cookie ID, email, phone number into one user. That's step one. Like, this is called identity stitching, ID resolution, and so on. And it is surprisingly hard to do it in SQL, right? Or so on. I mean, you have to write a lot of logic. It's like you have to get it correct and write this and so on. Right? So that's kind of step one. Now think about, it's not just ID stitching. You're trying to compute features, right? Features are like how many times you have browsed, let's say, a product. Like, that's a feature. How many times have you looked at like furnitures? Now, to compute that feature, you may have to now combine activities across all these IDs, right? You may have browsed furnitures as an anonymous user on a mobile device, and you may have browsed as a known user on a web device, and then you want to combine all of them into one single feature, right? So that's like, so you have to like look at all of this and compute that feature. Now, some features are even harder to compute. Let's say you're computing a revenue feature, right? How much am I getting from this person? And think of like somebody having a subscription business. So you have like point purchases and you have like subscription purchases. So subscription data might be coming from your Stripe account, while your point purchases may be coming from some transactional systems or web events. So you have to combine all of them. And the Stripe data may have a separate ID, right? So computing the customer 360, as it may sound simple. Like, as we work with customers, we've seen like they spend months and months hiring a team of data analysts and so on to compute this table, right? So like this golden customer record.
I'm dating myself, but we used to do it all by hand, right? You just create. You used to do it all by hand, join it all, right? You know, create what we call features now, and then it immediately changed.
Yeah,
right? That's the other problem.
Yeah, so that is the other part, right? I mean, like, so then you're all doing this because you want to send this data. Your marketing team needs a feature to run a marketing campaign, right? They need the total revenue to run a campaign. And tomorrow they might need a separate feature, like total revenue in the last 7 days or something. And every time they have to, like, they need a new feature, they have to go back to the data team. They have to figure out how to compute that feature. It gets into a sprint and it takes like 2 weeks to compute that feature by the time marketing needs something else, right? So this whole process of unification, if done by the data team, like, adds this complexity and like it's not useful for the downstream.
And maybe people can't do it anymore. Like, there's just so much data, it's possible you need to infer it programmatically, right?
Exactly. So that's what like is the unification product we launched. I think like we thought people can take care of it, but like as we work with more customers, this is often the hardest piece. And we kind of productize this, like, so it like we're launching this product in Snowflake Summit. We have some early customers. We got some great response, but like this, the whole idea is to like make it easy to create this customer 360 for both the data teams and engineering teams, but also non-tech people like marketing and product and so on.
That's such a great call out too. Hopefully I'll see you at Snowflake Summit, but that's exciting. You know, I think it's such a great evolution of the roadmap, and I think I can see why people are excited about it, because as hard as it is to do what you originally, if the baseline is very hard, people feel the result in this activity of unification. That's where they kind of see the output of what they wanted to do.
That's a great point. In fact, like when we were working with our early beta customers on this, like they were using Rudderstack to collect all the data. It was going into the warehouse, but like this output customer 360, that really like triggers the light bulbs, right? Okay, wow, like I can see this one record per customer with all these features. And then that's when they also get creative. Maybe I can also add this additional feature. Maybe this would be interesting to get like how many support tickets they have. and they will add another source. So that's why we don't charge for this product yet. I mean, we charge only for the data pipelines, but this product like triggers the thought of like, okay, like we need more data, we need more interesting sources, and so on. So like,
and
yeah,
I think it really puts your finger directly on the existential problem for most complex businesses. There's just not enough data people. The people who
yeah,
know what features they need, the people who are asking the right questions, they don't have the data chops, right?
exactly.
And it's a
So
problem.
that's
I mean, it used to be something funny we talked about, like, oh, we'll just bring in the less technical people. Listen, that's the majority of the people in the
yeah,
organizations. They know the
yeah,
business and they don't have enough tools.
yeah.
So I think that's
And
cool.
it's a chicken and egg problem. The other thing I see is like, I mean, unless you can create that customer 360 and like provide like show value from that, you don't get budget from your execs to hire more data people. And then like unless you do that, you cannot like like create that in the first place, right? So yeah, I think like this is hopefully an opportunity to like break from that cycle.
I want to talk about your business. On the business side, we talked about the product and the tech. I want to talk a little bit about the business. I should have done more research on this, but I should assume you're getting questions about generative AI.
Yeah.
How that affects this modality that you've identified as something customers need. Do you have any common questions you're hearing?
Yeah, so I think everyone and anyone is interested in generative AI, including my mom, right? So I was like, what are you doing in generative AI? I think we are building some things around like embedding generative AI into the product, right? Starting with support, which is the easiest one, right? I mean, like, how do you better search over your docs, right? And so on. And then we'll add embed in the product transformations, right? We have a transformation feature, we can auto-generate code and so on. So those are like small things in the product. I think the big driver for us is, I believe, we will finally realize one-to-one personalization with generative AI, right? I mean, if like we have been talking about it forever, right? One-to-one personalization. And like we talked about it in my previous company, even 10 years before that, we are talking about it. But there were two missing things. One is like you did not have the tech to do it, right? Even if I knew everything about you, right? As a human, I can write the most perfect message for you, right? Like marketing message for you. But then how do you scale that, right? So there was no tech to do that. And that's why like the whole marketing ecosystem was built around segmentation, right? You create broad segments like woman in New York, I'll do this messaging and something else, right? You could not do one-to-one, right? So now finally we have a tech to do one-to-one, right? I mean, you can like feed everything about a user and then like some magic, right? ChatGPT or something built on ChatGPT will come up with the perfect message for that person. So assuming that is solved, what you need though is still to collect everything about that person, right? Like if you don't have the data, then you cannot call this module, right? And hopefully that will keep us in business and that will like help drive revenue for us. So far we have been more focused on the data problems, but I think like, I mean, right now we have not built these use cases, but I like somebody will build, us or somebody else will take all this data and craft the perfect marketing message for that person, like given everything they know and the perfect support message or whatever, right? So
that's right. That's interesting. Yeah, I feel that way too. It's I get excited about data, solving data problems with cloud data because we've been waiting so long for the promise of true personalization, accurate sub-second underwriting, all of those things, right? So I do feel like it's a little bit more easy to see it on the horizon than it was in the past few years. So that's interesting. Let's talk a little bit about the business and the traction you're getting with customers. I know you've got I saw a couple of use cases you can talk about where you've got some happy customers. Again, let's intersect that with like how do customers implement? How do they get started? And maybe you can use a couple of examples of real customers if you have some to share.
Yeah. So I think I'm not sure. Like, so I'll maybe like talk about the specific use case, like we are sharing.
Yeah, I maybe didn't ask the question.
Yeah.
It's a lot. I didn't ask the question perhaps correctly. It's just that what you do, you come to me as the head of the bank, and you're like, give me all your data. I'm sure people feel like they don't want to do that right away. So how do you carve out your
Yeah.
land before you expand?
Yeah. In fact, like that's the whole value prop of Rudderstack. We don't say give us all the data. The story we tell our customers is like you have some data in your data warehouse. Are you truly getting business value out of that data? Maybe you're powering some dashboards and so on,
Okay.
but how do you getting business value of that data, right? So then they will say, okay, like, yeah, I mean, I have some basic churn model. It would be good to like build these additional use cases to drive business value, right? That is the conversation. So then we say, okay, so to build that churn model, let's say, again, taking that example, do you have a golden customer record on which you can train the model and then you can run the predictions and so on? And more often than not, the answer is no, right? We don't have that. Then the conversation goes into like, do you even have the data to build like that golden customer record? Right? Do you have all your like first party data? Do you have your like ETL data? And again, more often than not, the answer is no, right? We have some data, not everything, and so on. So like, that's what we solve, right? We almost start backwards. We say like, what is the business use case you're trying to drive? Do you have the golden customer record and do you have the data completeness, right? So we can go that way and then like, but implement forward, right? You have to start collecting data, then you build the golden customer record, and then you go and activate the use case. We have had customers who have kind of done this whole thing in a month. We have customers who are like, take 6 months to take this journey, right? But like, that's kind of our pitch. So that's the one product, right? The other product is like data collection, right? Thankfully, like Segment, which was acquired by Twilio, has built a big business around data collection, right? They have kind of like told the world that this is a problem. You should not be doing it from scratch. Like this, just use us as solution. And we are we are like an API compatible replacement for Segment, right? And after acquisition, anytime I have great respect for Segment and what they have done, but like after acquisition, we always have unhappy customers and we want to move on. So like that's the other product. We get a lot of inbound leads just for that, like data collection. I don't want to like the whole journey. So like we have both kind of like go-to-market motions, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you're all SaaS, is that correct?
Yeah, we are all SaaS.
Okay. And help me. The other question I had real quick is help me understand the difference between the open source offering and the rest.
Yeah. So the only piece which is open source for us is the data collection piece, right? So if like the event streaming data collection, like our SDKs are open source, our backend is open source. In fact, like when we first launched Rudderstack, we launched as an open source alternative to Segment, right? I mean, that was like, and we got on Hacker News. In fact, that's where like we initially, first time I got on Software Engineering Daily was like in response to that Hacker News post where Jeff reached out. He wanted to talk about why are we doing this and so on. So yeah, that's how we got to market. That's then open source. We have a thriving, like we have a lot of open source users. I would say like we have a lot of commits to the code base other than like our destination SDKs, right? Like we integrate with so many destinations. That's where like we get some community contribution even from the downstream vendors. But like that's what is open source. But then why people pay us is like sometimes they don't want to manage the open source, number one. Number two is like sometimes they have scale requirement, right? I mean, if you want high availability, if you want like multi-node and so auto scale up, auto scale down on the ingest piece, then that's what is only available in the SaaS offering, right? So that's how we kind of make money. So that's part one. And the other parts of the unify and activate we are talking about, right? That is our commercial offering, right? That is only available in SaaS.
And are you priced on consumption?
It is priced on event amount of data that moves through Rudderstack. So like, yeah, it's pretty straightforward. Like whether you're moving ETL, streaming, reverse ETL, either way, we just charge for whatever you're moving through us.
Gotcha. Well, that sounds amazing. Do you want to, I know you're going to be a Snowflake Summit talking about some amazing new stuff. I know you also had a couple of like, just to walk us through like a real business case, like what really happened. It's sometimes really helpful to hear that so that it can frame up the rest of what we've talked about.
Yeah. So I think like one like case study that we are presenting at Snowflake Summit is with this customer called Wise. They make like mobile cams, right? I mean, cameras that you can put in your house and so on. They have like over 24 million like subscribers. Like it's a huge business with as you can imagine, a lot of data, right? I mean, like the mobile cams are IoT devices. They emit some data, and so on. And they wanted to like drive like similar like use cases, right? Can you predict churn? Can you drive up LTV? Like any subscription business has the same set of use cases as they have. So they are using Rudderstack to collect all that data into a data warehouse. They're using the Unify product to create that golden customer record. They're pushing that back into Braze to run engagement campaigns. They built churn models and so on. And they moved from some legacy CDP to the stack, and that kind of like I don't remember top of my head, but like they're like 5x increase in productivity in deploying new ML models, right? Adding in new features through profiles is like
that's big.
Much is there. Yeah. Because again, I think like you have to, as we were discussing earlier, you have to like handcraft a lot of those features, right? Write complex SQL, figure that out. I think with our unified product, that has become much easier.
One thing I forgot to ask you real quick, and then we can wrap it up is, customer data has a lot of obligations around it for privacy and tracking. I should know this, but how do you address that, or do you? Is that something a partner does?
Yeah, in fact, like that is one of the biggest selling points of Rudderstack, right? I mean, and that's why we have a lot of traction in EU as well, right? Where people are very sensitive about like data privacy, like a lot more than the US. And our story is simple, right? We don't store any customer data, right? We are just the data pipelines for moving the data. All the unification also happens on top of customers' data warehouse, right? Their own Snowflake instance and BigQuery and so on. So like we do not store data, right? And that really simplifies our story. We also have a deployment in EU so that like the EU data stays in EU, US data stays in US. We also have a deployment model where we can run the whole data plane. Like the data plane I was talking about, it's still SaaS, but it can run inside a customer's VPC. So in that case, we don't even see the bits, right? In SaaS, we at least like see the data moving through us. But here, if it is running in a VPC, we don't even see the bits, right? Entirely, it moves through customers. So like compliance, in fact, like when we started, like our pitch was like compliance is going to be important. We are a solution to that, right? So the warehouse first, everything was centered around compliance. Now over time, we realized warehouse first has a lot more advantages, just not compliance.
Yeah, that's a good plan. You sort of rise above it and just let the whatever the customer is doing, just stay on it in terms of protection. So that's smart. That I can see why certainly in the EU they would love that. Well, we're kind of wrapping it up. I have a couple quick questions. Is there anything you wanted to talk about that I forgot to ask about?
No, this was great. I think like you covered everything. Thanks for touching
Absolutely. It's so great to have you here. And then one last question I'd like to ask some of our more technical founders is, our audience is made up of software developers, architects, people who might be considering doing a startup. And I'm just wondering if you have any words of advice as a technical founder.
Yeah, I have been a founder, like this is my third company. I started a company right out of college, did another company as a CTO, and then this I'm running as a founder, CEO. I think, I don't know if it applies for every technical founder, but one thing I'll say is like, there are two things actually which is important. Number one is like, as a technologist, you are always trying to look for something new, right? Like when I was doing my PhD, the entire focus was you have to find a research problem that nobody has worked on before, right? Like that's what like you can only then can you get a paper published, right? When you are like trying to, as a technologist, when you see what can I build new, right? I mean, nobody has thought about it. I'll build something amazing, right? And that is always the inclination. You almost have to unlearn that, right? The goal is not to build something new. The goal is to build something which people need, right? And if people need something, more often than not, somebody would have built it once before, right? Somebody would have tried it. Maybe they didn't have the right solution. Maybe they had an old architecture and so on. So don't try to build something new. Try to build something people care about, which more often than not means people have done it before. And like we often reject ideas saying that, oh, this has been built before. We cannot build a company here. And like I built Rudderstack, right, where segment was like doing 100 billion in revenue. And there's still so much market left, right? I mean, And I'd give a lot of the credit to my investors, my advisors to actually go after this market, right? Irrespective of whether segment was there or not. So I think that is one big learning as a technical founder. The second thing I would say is kind of follow up to that. You can either try to create a market. There are only so many risks you can take as a founder, right? I mean, there is a market risk, there is a technology risk, and there is a team risk, right? These are the three main risks. And some people are good at some things, right? I mean, Uber created a market, right? Clearly, the founder was great at creating a market, right? Technologists, engineers, us, we are often not super eloquent. We are not great, charismatic people to create a market, right? It is often better. I think we have a higher chance of success if we go after a known market with a better solution, right? What we can do is build better products, right? And then so on. So this kind of goes back to the earlier point, don't try to do something new, go after something which has been done before, do it better. And then
I love that. I think we do suffer from trying to be too cool.
Yeah, exactly, right?
I feel that when I write blogs or, I'm like, oh, everything's been said. Everything's been written. Or if I'm posting to LinkedIn, but it hasn't all been said.
Yeah. This is I think the biggest thing. I mean, look at how many generative AI companies are there. And I mean, in the last 3 months, I've probably been pitched 20 times different companies doing generative AI for support, right? Support and so on. Only one will survive. And the market is not even clear. Versus if you look at a segment, again, I'll take that as an example. For 7 years, they had literally no competition, and they've made a $300 million business, right? I mean, they're probably a $10 billion market, right? So there are all these white spaces and markets where literally there is no competition. Versus as technologists, we often try to do cool stuff, right? Versus
right.
where there are markets. I think Peter Thiel, I mean, he is a controversial figure, but I have great respect for his thought. I mean, he has a book around this whole thing, right? I mean, go for it. You should not, you can build a company only when there is no competition, right? I mean, don't try to compete, right? So anyway, I can go on and on. But
I think that's great. We have to do another show on the nature of competition and what it means. Because I do think that's such an important, people say, and even investing, people say, I don't have any competition. And I would feel oh, I don't know. I feel everyone who has a good idea should have some competition.
100%.
Anyways, it's great to talk with you. I hope all the best at Snowflake Summit. Start drinking water now. Wear your sneakers.
Yeah.
And we'll see you again on the show. Best of luck. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Josh.